Welcome to the PantheonPlus Rewind.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of The Rewind. And as always, I'm joined by Theric and Omega Contagion to help bring the community up to speed on what's going out there in the world of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and of course, the MMO genre itself. So let's not waste any time, gentlemen. Are you ready to get this show started?
I'm ready, willing, and able.
I am able, willing, and ready.
All right, we're all coffeeed up today. This has been a rough morning for all of us, so hopefully we are okay for you guys out there. But here we go. Let's get into the news.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes.
So VR this week in social media were pretty quiet, but we actually had 2 Twitter questions. They like to do their questions out there on Twitter that are community focused. And I actually really liked both of these. And I'll ask you guys if you have anything to add to these as well. But let me read through the community. So the first one here, and there is not a single soul alive who hasn't played an MMORPG that doesn't have one of these. But the first question was, what is your best just 5 more minutes story? And of course, if you're new to the genre, that means where you've told somebody in your family or friends or a loved one, I'll be off in 5 minutes, but then you fall down the rabbit hole. So here's some of the people in the community that had some answers that were pretty good. Drac Attack, who's pretty big in the community here. We know and love this guy. He said, just 5 more minutes camping the Frenzied for a chance at the flowing black silk sash. Morning time, still no sash. All-nighter. Pulled an all-nighter there. I love it. You have to keep going when you're camping those individual mobs. You never know. It could be the next one. Then we had He said, being a raid leader, we would have a 5 more minutes talk just about daily. Raid targets don't kill themselves and are finite. Yeah, that one was big for me. I just sitting there and we would get a boss slightly better. And, oh, guys, you want to try one more attempt? 5 more minutes. Let's give it another try. We're close. And, 10 tries later, we kill it and everyone's exhausted, but it's phenomenal. We have Kratuk here says, the end of every EQL level ever. You remember that, Theric?
Oh my God. Unfortunately, I do.
You would be sitting there at that level forever. When you were close, you thought you were close, but it would still take forever to get that little tiny bit.
Very much.
Project Valhalla said, rating the Avatar of War. Just pulled the Avatar of War. Parents were telling me to go to bed. Needless to say, we failed about 7 times in a row until we finally downed him. 5 more minutes turned into 3 more hours. Exactly what we were just saying there. This is your brother here, I think, Omega. His name is Digital Contagion. I mean, I don't know what's going on there. Digital Contagion.
He's got the computer virus.
Yes. He says, EverQuest, buddies and I at a LAN party, which are amazing. That's a lost art. We're trying to finish up a level before going to bed. Next thing we know, there's a light coming from outside. We open the curtains, only to reveal a large ball of fire in the sky, trying to destroy our eyeballs. It's 9 a.m. already. That's awesome. Zendro says, I was invited to a Christmas dinner. I was in a group trying to get a set helm. Ended up getting the helm for our entire 6-man group. Just 5 more minutes turned into 2 hours later and missing some of the Christmas dinner. So that's great. Frank here says EQ. He said 7 o'clock. Someone says, dude, you need to go to class. He says, okay, 5 more minutes. 9 o'clock. Did you make it to class? I said just 5. Oh, I guess I missed it. Okay, don't miss the next one. You've been studying all week for it. Just 5 more minutes. I almost leveled. 2 o'clock rolls around. Let me guess. I leveled. So you missed the class, 2 classes, but got that level. This one I had to put in here. Some people might not know this one, but this is one of the best in a game maybe people don't play as much. It's popular. But Lance Moheski said Civilization 5, and you can also sub in Civ 4 for that. 5 more minutes turns into the next day at sunrise, but it's well worth it. If you play that game with friends, like, you can save it at any time and pick it up, but nobody wants to save it and pick it back up. Everybody wants to finish it. And you always had one friend who took forever to do their turn, and you just wanted to kill them because you knew 5 turns in advance what you're going to do. Your turn took a minute. Theirs took 10 minutes. So that's a great game for it. I've told mine a few times, but I've never told it on the rewind, so I'll tell it real quick here. Me and a buddy in high school, my grandparents were gone for the weekend. I had 2 computers in my bedroom, and we decided to camp the ancient Cyclops in the Ocean of Tears spawn, which was, you kill this one mob and it has a chance to spawn the ancient Cyclops, but it's a super low chance. And then you also have a low chance of, him dropping the ring that we needed for the J-Boots quest. So it's a completely random spawn. It wasn't something where you could get it if you stayed for X amount of hours. And we had stayed probably about 20 hours and not gotten it, which was really bad luck. And people were coming by constantly. And what we were doing is we were just kind of rotating. Like one person would maybe rest for a little bit, the other guy would jump on, and we'd rotate back and forth. And we ended up getting to about the 24-hour mark. We're like, we finally got it, I think, roughly in about that time. And, we ran one of our characters there, held the loot, and got them the thing. And then we're like, well, we've already spent 24 hours here. Maybe we'll get lucky and get another one quick, right? So that was the whole concept of like, well, maybe we'll hit 2 back to back here. It's been a really long time. It ended up being almost 72 hours of a pure camp. We actually would sleep while the other person played, and we played it from Friday to almost like Sunday night. And I think we ended up with like 3 or 4 rings. It wasn't great luck for that amount of time camping it, but a bunch of our characters got J-boots. So it was pretty worthwhile, but that was the longest place in one place I ever sat in any MMORPG for sure. And I don't know that I'd ever do it again, but who knows? Maybe we'll see. Do you guys have any stories like that kind of ring? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all probably do. And it's that gambler's logic of if it hasn't happened yet, it's more likely to happen soon, right? So you've been sitting there for 5 hours and you think, well, 5 more minutes, the chances keep going up. But it's not actually how it works. But we have that mindset. But for me, it was university because EverQuest was right in the prime of my university time. And I remember one night, and I don't remember what I was camping, but I was doing something that I really wanted. And I had an exam the next morning at like 8:30 a.m., right? And 5 more minutes turned into I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to get a medium night's sleep. I'll survive, into, oh my God, I'm getting no sleep. And I didn't. And I went and wrote the exam. And, I think I did okay. I got by it. But yeah, 5 more minutes turned into risking my academic future.
That's great. And so when you got home after the exam, were you out cold instantly?
Out like a light. I think I slept for 8 hours, 10 hours. Yeah.
Omega, how about you? Do you have any 5-minute more stories?
Oh man, it's really hard to pick like one that stands out. In terms of MMOs, not really, because I didn't get into those until later life. But when I was younger, we'd spend summers out at my aunt's place, and me and my cousins, we'd hit the Sega Genesis pretty hard. Yeah, and we would stay up all night playing Golden Axe, and yeah.
Yeah. When I was a kid, we had the NES, and I used to tell my mom, she'd say, okay, it's time to stop playing. And I'd say, well, just let me die. Just let me die. Right. So she would think that means it's imminent. But I was like, well, I just didn't die. I was good at the game. So it lasted, another hour. And she's like, you said it was going to be just let you die. And so I have that kind of memory as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I can hear you on the console games. I used to be a console gamer like crazy. So yes, for sure. So the next one here is, for anybody out there who isn't behind the scenes with some of the stuff we do, which is pretty much everybody, I have had this dream of having a boss fights show that we do on PantheonPlus some point, and hopefully someday I will make that happen. But they asked for group and raid bosses. What is your favorite all-time group or raid boss? In this one, guys, I could spend 15 PantheonPlus views talking about boss fights because I love them so much and I love the intricacy, but I will save everybody all that time frame here and just talk about what some of the people here said. So Basgrim was the first one I saw. He said so many from DDO that bring back fond memories, but Solamades, which was named AKA Sully, which I love that happens with a lot of bosses. They'll be shortened into some memorable name, is the first that comes to mind. He was one of the first raids I did, and just getting to him was an epic journey. He wasn't necessarily the hardest boss, but fun nonetheless. So that's it wasn't just fighting him, it was the journey to get there. With Jeremy Hamilton, he said X89 from WildStar is one of the best introductory raid bosses ever done. I put that in there because I didn't get to play much WildStar. So, and I had heard that it was really good. So I threw that in there for all the WildStar fans out there that unfortunately had a pretty short-lived game. So the next one here was from James Martini. He said, I think one of my favorites was WoW BC, the opera fight in Karazhan. You didn't know which fight you were walking into until the MC announced it. I'm not a fan of boss fights that are so predictable. You have raid timers counting down to use the abilities or phase transitions. So I put this in here, and I'm going to tell you guys, we're going to hear a couple more things about Karazhan. And if you go through this thread, Karazhan is incredibly mentioned. And I will tell you guys that it is easily one of my top 5 of all time. The whole raid itself is just mind-blowing for the time. But this fight that he's talking about, for those that don't know it, you would walk onto an opera stage and there was an MC who would come out and he'd start to tell the tale of the play you were going to see. And the play could be one of 3, which was pretty interesting. You had like the Big Bad Wolf, you had the Wizard of Oz, and you had, I think it was at the time, the West Side Story, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. They know they added one later, but I think that was your original 3. Or no, it was Romeo and Juliet, not West Side Story. West Side Story was added later. So, and it was amazing because it was cool. You were fighting on this stage and there was a bunch of undead people sitting in the crowd watching you. And then you had to do this different boss fight and you weren't sure which one you were going to get until he announced it. That was an incredible moment, especially walking in there for the first time, just being blown away by the interactivity of it. So, Micah said, Bahamut in the final coil from Final Fantasy XIV. Not only was it a fun fight, the loot was good, but as someone who was just there on the night in the video below, which he linked a video, you could check it out. It just came with a lot of feels, he said. So pretty cool. Jimmy Lee Jingle was also talking about Karazhan. He said I can never pronounce his name right. Malchezaar. Malchezaar. Yeah. He was the end boss of it. And it's just the way he phrases why this was such a good fight. Because I don't think the fight in itself was great, but the way he phrases it makes sense. He said you had to break into the castle through the stables, because you literally had to start in the stables, fight your way up past guards, undead monsters, a dragon. In the final battle, there's an angry demon prince who essentially gets his crown stolen, T4 helm. So just the journey made that fight even better. And we heard that kind of same thing from Basgrim, which is kind of cool. I love this one from Gary. He's Acaster01 on Twitter. He said, so many, and this is great. He said, but probably Divin. He's not a major boss, but he was the first kick your arse boss I faced in EQ. And so many runs to ZL being chased by him. I love that because Ambassador Vin was in Crushbone, for those that don't know. And yeah, it was just, it was a raid boss technically, like for its time. And I still remember that dagger that he would drop. So that's awesome, right?
Well-known guy.
Yep. Balefur said, Lich King was huge for me. The screaming at the end, I'll never forget. We defeated evil. Awesome. That's awesome. And then after that, it says here, mine that I put in. So, and I put here, if Hayya saw me, he'd slap me. But looking back, I have to say the Coven of Shivara in Legion, WoW, was my favorite fight of all time. I linked that on Twitter in the response. I put the video. But to give you guys a quick rundown of this fight, it was disastrous for our guild. You're going to laugh at this, but we actually ended up kicking out some of our top DPS players, like our top. They were ranked within the top 10% because they were in the top 10% because they were always constantly just focused on their DPS. And they were also people who would kind of point out other people in the guild who weren't doing enough. And they were constantly dying because this fight, it did require a very hard DPS check, but it was so mechanics based. If you weren't in the right place at the right time all the time, you wiped your goop. And no matter how many you had, if you lost 2 people, the fight was over because you needed everybody to get through all the different mechanics. And add to it that you had these 3 different bosses, which would swap one out. You're fighting 2 at a time that had different mechanics, that did different random attacks, and then summoned random monsters to, like, as souls and spirits to come fight you of 4 different types. And in the heroic mode of this fight, nothing was scripted. Nothing. Like, you had to react. It's funny because the mythic version, while it added a new enemy into the fight, it was scripted. You knew the order the enemies were coming in all the time. You knew the order of their major attacks. You knew the order of the spirits. So you could script it out and learn it. But this one was, you could only learn segments. And when that segment showed up, you had to execute. And you had a split second notice or you were dead, like instantly dead. And we fought this fight for probably a month and a half or 2 months. And we literally we lost guild members. There was frustrations between leadership. But when we pulled off that fight, the screaming in the channel. And like, I got to tell you guys, it was so hard for our group because we accepted casual people. We had anything from hardcore to casual, but it was so hard that once we killed them 4 times, you could skip it. And I got to be honest with you, we really never did it a whole lot more. And at the time I hated it, but looking back, it was just so challenging. And I've never experienced anything like that fight, especially in heroic difficulty. It was just incredible. So I don't know if there's any that you guys instantly have come up off the top of your head, but what do you guys think?
Well, I don't have anything that epic right at hand, but that is just an epic story, and it's just such a good example of what we're talking about with these. We want these moments of challenge and these moments, that stick in your mind. EverQuest 20 years ago, Divin, and just awesome stuff. I love it.
I think for me, my raiding experience, like in MMOs, it's not as big as your guys, but I raided a lot in Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. And in Destiny 2, the very first raid, there's a lot of these random mechanics that happen where your team will be teleported and split up, and you can't predict who's going where. And then once you get to these places, there's very specific things you have to do in a specific order, but it's timed, and if you don't do it fast enough, you die. And those types of mechanics in raids is what I really like, because it always causes like drama between people, but once you pull it off, it's such a feeling of I'm such a badass and really good at this game. Destiny 2 and Destiny, I know it's kind of a point of contention for some MMO players, but if you are someone who plays shooters, those raids and the mechanics in them are just amazing.
I've actually heard that quite a bit about the Destiny raids. I had played a little bit of Destiny, not a ton by any means, like some of the Taken King stuff and some of the launch stuff, but I didn't get too hardcore. I'd have my little spurts in the Taken King where I got real into it, but I don't think I ever really got hard into the raids or anything. But I had heard how challenging they were and how punishing they were too, which is pretty important when I think it comes to raids. But I'm curious in the comments, guys, share your favorite raid stories, or what are your favorite raids, or even link them in the descriptions there. I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say. I think raiding, for those that do it, is the lifeblood of MMORPGs. Between raids and dungeons, I think that for me is what keeps me playing and wanting to see the next thing. So the last piece here in VR news and community notes from them. The biggest thing is we have a VR stream coming up Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Standard Time, Pacific Standard Time. And this is the first that's going to be their new monthly offering. So make sure to check them out on Twitch and come hang out with us in the community. It's usually a really, really good time. So everybody, hopefully we'll see you there.
When the community speaks, we listen. Let's dig into social media and see what they're talking about.
Okay, so we will start this week's trip to the official forums at PantheonMMO.com with a discussion about how stealth and invisibility is going to function in Pantheon. So this is in the general Pantheon discussion subforum, and the title of the post is Stealth and Invisibility Detection Mechanics, and it's posted by Darch. So he asks, stealth and invisibility, or more importantly, the detection of stealth and invis, are going to be in Pantheon. But the question is, to what extent will they be utilized? So with that said, his question is, how will the detection of stealth and invisibility work? Will they be considered the same as they were in EverQuest, where the same line of see invisibility buffs detected both? Or will there be separate stealth detection and see invisibility skills or spells that only work for the appropriate non-detection methods? And if there are different skills and spells for stealth and invisibility, will that be further broken down into hide and sneak versus perception skill versus and invisibility spell level source versus see invisibility? So basically a long way of saying, are stealth and invisibility the same thing? And if not, will the methods of detection be different in Pantheon? So he asked for the community's thoughts on what they think about this sort of delineation. So firstly, Renarius said he would like to see NPCs actively use stealth and invisibility, and that they should also function differently. Liav said he's played a lot of rogue types in MMOs. He agrees in the distinction too, and that the rogue class needs to be tied to stealth detection. So bringing a rogue in your group should be desirable, but also not to the point where you can't do an area without one. Ria Hoff 22 said it's sort of hard to say NPCs should use invisibility stealth like a buff. Counterfletch said stealth should be non-binary. So the higher the stealth skill, the less movement speed is lost. Partial stealth should appear to be as a motion blur. Invisibility, therefore, or invisibility on the other hand, is binary, but there should be clues such as sounds or seeing like the breath freezing in the cold air that could make invisibility detectable. Ixar said stealth detection should account for range, with some classes being able to detect from a further distance. Invisibility for mobs should probably not exist, because he didn't enjoy being killed by an invisible creature. And then Liev later came back and agreed with this, and I can definitely see where he's coming from there. Disposalist said he would like to see a more sophisticated approach to detection, but also, to keep in mind that Pantheon's a group-based game, right? So when you have group mechanics going on, that's sort of implied to some extent already. He said it's important that some content is designed around stealth being emphasized. So like specific dungeons where stealth is sort of like the featured mechanic in that dungeon, I think is what he's getting at there. And Darch came back, the original poster came back and said he felt WoW did a really good job of this. Sometimes you'd hear a stealth mob, and sometimes you'd see them just before they came out of stealth, just in time to defend against their attack. So I'll turn this over to you guys, and Minus, you are the resident stealth expert here. What do you think about stealth and invisibility and how it should work in Pantheon?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that a lot of people that play rogues that I've talked to, a lot of us agree that WoW did this probably one of the best that I've seen. I'd also add DDO to this. I think you don't need to overcomplicate it. And I think a lot of this is possibly coming from the EQ players where you had to, in EQ, I do not like how stealth worked. I really hope it is nothing like EQ stealth. You had to sneak and hide to get to be able to move sneaking.
Right.
It was really a mess. It was overcomplicating something that's so built around what the class is all about. If you're talking about a rogue, for example, in a rogue standpoint, yeah, it should be based on skill, right? So your level of stealth should improve and make you better. It should be based on the level of the mob that's near you or in front of you. If it's 5 levels lower than you and you're maxed in your stealth to where you can be, that mob shouldn't be able to see you like a mob who's higher should be able to. And then, of course, you have mobs that just would have detection. There's mobs in the games that you can't sneak by. And we've already seen that that's something that Pantheon's going to have with the dispositions. So there'll be mobs that you can't. Now, at the same time, you shouldn't be able to touch a mob stealth and them not find you. If you bump into them, you should be detected. You should be detected a lot more if you're in front of them. If you're behind them, you should have more bonus to that, where they aren't going to hear you, even if they are higher than you. So I think things like distracting tactics and stuff like that WoW had, where you could actually throw a stone and everything would turn to it, which would help you sneak behind it for that extra bonus. Stuff like that's really important. Now, I think the other thing when I'm hearing, the invisibility side, the other thing was there were a lot of people that in EQ you had invisibility and then you had invisibility versus undead, and those were two different things.
Right.
It's interesting to me because invisibility is something you can typically cast on anybody, whereas stealth should be tied to the rogue. So I think that stealth should be better because the rogue is made for stealth, so it should have an advantage over a caster who can cast invisibility on anybody. I think that, like the radial detection, the frontal detection, things like that for invisibility should be much more critical than for a rogue who can stealth. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, it's very much a defining feature of the rogue, and I look back to what Counterfletch said there, and I really like the idea of the sort of a different visual representation of a rogue's level of stealth. So, as you get better, it goes from being like, you're still pretty much your character looks the same. As you get better, you become sort of partially stealth, so it's like a motion blur effect. And then once you get really good and you're a master of stealth, you are basically invisible to all but other rogues perhaps. But Omega, what about you? Do you have any sort of opinion on the stealth versus invisibility topic?
No, pretty much everything that you guys have already said, and Counterfletch point and Ixar's point, I think, are both great ways to approach it. I really like the idea of the breath freezing in the air. And in DDO, I don't know if you guys remember on the newbie island when you're going through that last big cave, there's those frozen spiders who are stealthed and they're kind of walking around, but you can see like this little trail of frost being left in the air as they're moving around. Stuff like that is really cool for the mobs. And in terms of the player, itself, just pretty much exactly what Mina said. I couldn't say it any better myself. So
He is the resident rogue expert, so I
He
think we defer
knows.
to him. Okay, so we will go now over to the introductions sections of the forum and say hi to a new member of the community. So Undertanker jumped in this week with an advisor's pledge. So good job, Undertanker. So he says, greetings gamers. I've been following the project for some days since the Kickstarter, so a long time. He's finally committed to pledge. He's played a bunch of different MMOs in his time. And in 15 years of experience doing different sort of builds, he's going to be playing an Ogre Warrior. He's going to be the main tank sort of role. So he's looking forward to getting away from the sort of quote pull all things in AoE fashion that we see in a lot of modern MMOs, which I think we can all attest to, and getting back to the way things sort of used to be. He's on the lookout for a hardcore competitive guild that is looking to raid. Around his time zone, he specified 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time would be the kind of guild he'd be looking for. So if you are one of those guilds and you need an Ogre Warrior, go over to the forums and send Undertanker a message. Yeah,
Awesome.
so
I love
welcome.
that you highlight people coming into the community. So
Yeah, it's really great. I would encourage everybody to go over there and do the same. So we'll go over to Reddit and look at the PantheonMMO subreddit. And this is probably my favorite topic that we've done so far in this section of the discussions, because it's but it's posted by the moderator over there, Sparks Interface, and he put up a poll. And the poll was basically talking about the pacing in which MMOs give players new skills and spells. So ask yourself how you'd respond to this statement. When leveling up, I think characters should get new spells and or skills every X levels. Your options are 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So I checked at the end of the week, so yesterday, and about 287 people had voted on this poll. And the results were, so the top answer was every 2 levels. So 30% said that. The second answer was every single level. 21% of people said every single level you should get a new skill or a new spell. 18% of the people said every 3 levels. 15% said every 4 levels, which was my vote. Coincidentally. And the last place vote was for every 5 levels, with only 14% of the people saying that. And then some of the commentary, this was a really interesting one. So some of the commentary, because people are all over the place a little bit. Xantub said 1 skill every 1 to 2 levels. He prefers to learn and integrate new abilities slowly rather than sort of the quote rain from heavens every 4 or 5 levels. And this also avoids big power spikes for certain classes. Stod said, depends on leveling speed and range. How often do I get to make big important choices? Early leveling, needs to feel a bit more rewarding. Bot Lane and Chill said, miss the old pace of leveling. New abilities spells every 1 to 2 levels, with the milestone ones every 5 to 10 levels seems to feel right. Glass Cleaner said every 4 levels, it gives you time to focus on what's on the horizon. Somebody else said not all classes need to be on the same timing. So that's interesting. Perhaps some classes get them every 1 to 2 levels, while others get them 4 to 5. It depends on a lot of things. Bison T said he picked 2, but he was surprised to see that the majority, where the majority of the vote was going. So he said spread them out, maybe even more than 2, no big power spikes every few levels. Jay Charay said he doesn't like a system connected to levels just in general, especially for casters, because it encourages powering through levels just to get those upgrades and certain spells. Natthaw said every 5 levels, so he was at the bottom in terms of what people selected overall. Fewer skills but more meaningful. Another person said, keep in mind, this is a good point actually, keep in mind travel in Pantheon will be really limited. Having to go back to town or to buy skills and spells will be very time consuming. And somebody else actually picked up on that and said the same thing, every 4 to 5 levels, because running back to town and EQ to get your new spells sucked, but also so did buying them ahead of time because you used up all your bag space, right? And then somebody else was very adamant saying that it should be every level, and basically even went further to say you should be rewarded constantly for almost everything you do to make sure you're getting that feeling of progression. So like I said, my vote went to every 4 levels because I do feel like there needs to be room for skills and spells to breathe a little bit. So when I get a new skill, I want to test it out. I want to get comfortable with it. I want to sort of experiment in different scenarios with it. Whereas if I get like constantly every level 1 to 2, I feel like I'm just, getting a little overwhelmed. But it does depend on a lot of other things too. So like the leveling speed, the pacing of that. But Omega, where would you put your vote in this poll?
Oh man, I thought I knew before, and now my opinion has changed. Originally, I was in the camp of like you should get something every level, not necessarily a new skill, but maybe in terms of Pantheon, a bunch of points to put into the living codex or something, like 3 or something like that. It's really hard to gauge without the numbers being solidified. But I mean, I do agree. I can't remember who said it, but they said early levels should be more rewarding. You want to kind of build up a bit of a toolkit, I think, within the first 10 levels, and then things can slow down. And then as long as the new things you're getting later on in your levels are powerful or interesting in some way, then grinding out those longer levels and getting those bigger rewards less often will have a big feeling to them.
Right. They should be
yeah.
they should be significant, right? As long as they're not throwaway skills or stuff that's
Yeah.
really inconsequential, then
It would
yeah,
really
that makes a lot
hurt
of
to
sense.
grind from like level 45 to 50 and get no skills until 50, and then that level 50 skill you do get is just really underwhelming and stupid,
True.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. I did vote in this, and I don't know why I voted what I did. And I was sitting there like, oh yeah, I'll vote. And then once the options were there, I like froze. Like I don't know what to commit to here. And I literally picked 3, which is weird. Like, why would you get an odd number of like I just picked it because it was in the middle and I didn't know what I wanted to pick, if I'm gonna be completely honest with you.
You really rode the fence.
Yeah, I really did on this one. And it's interesting because you guys have brought up some good stuff and the community's brought up some good stuff. So I'm actually a little opposite of you guys. I don't know that I want a big skill set until level 10. And I think I say that because so we have to assume that Pantheon's going to have some sort of starter levels. That's just, it has to be, guys. There has to be a way for a player to come in and not get crushed immediately and turn the game off. So there might be like maybe the first 5 levels are a little simple. And I think if they're simple, I would like to reward people at level 5, for example, like that their kit starts to develop. And I think having the first 5 levels that the game is easier and you have less spells and skills and you kind of just are learning the game, not so much your character. And then your character kind of starts when that hand holding or that slight little bit of easy leveling introduction to the game ends, that your skills start to develop will be pretty interesting. I don't know. This is really tough. I don't know when you should get skills. I would say probably every other level to every 4 levels maybe. But let's keep in mind we're also going to be getting mastery points every level. So I think maybe it's okay that we do new spells every 4 levels if you're going to be able to upgrade them slightly in between those levels. It's really tough. I don't know how you do it. Somebody said like every class being different. I think that's too complicated. Yeah, I don't know. I got to be honest with you guys. Like this is a topic where I'd have to really sit and think.
Yeah, it is really, really interesting. And there's lots of avenues you can go down there and try and figure out which way is best. But I guess we'll have to wait and see how Visionary Realms wants to tackle this one. So
Yeah, it'd be really hard to balance, I think, too, for in terms of people who are new to MMOs versus the veterans. If you balance a game purely for the veterans, they know exactly what they're doing and what they want. And new people, they just, they're just getting into it. And I'd bring up the example of Elder Scrolls Online, where you got to get to level 15 before you unlock your second weapon slot, so you can hot swap between them. And now that I've played that game for a number of years, and every new character I start, I really hate waiting for that. I wish I could have both of them really early so I could start building those skills earlier on.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really hard balance.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we've been playing some old MMOs lately just with us, and the tutorials, like I feel like if I have to do another MMO tutorial, I'm gonna just explode. But I understand there's a need for it, and like you said, and you said as well, Omega. You got to have that onboarding process. Excuse me, has to be there to not throw people right into the fire. So
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I will share something with you guys that I don't know that I've shared. And I think he'd be okay with it. But one of my last conversations with Brad was him talking about one of the the things that he focused on a ton was how to bring people in. What is the onboarding experience like? And that was something that he posed all kinds of different things to me, like, do we have a different server that's a little easier to get into so people can understand it? And I said, well, if you did that, would you transfer them off that server? He's like, no, I probably wouldn't want to do that. I said, well, people don't want to get stuck there just to learn the game. So it was a lot of back and forth that I actually got to talk to him about what that onboarding process would look like and how much of a challenge it is when you're talking about pleasing both the veteran crowd and wanting to bring new people in, and you want to make a punishing game, but you don't want to do it. You don't want them to come in and just die, and be like, well, I'm done with this game. You want them to feel what the world's about. You want them to feel where their character can be. You want them to be able to see the strong players running around and say, okay, I want to be that. And that takes time to develop. So that onboarding process is really tough because, like you've said, Theric, I don't want to keep doing them either. So it's an interesting concept. And this spell thing kind of ties into that, I guess, a little bit with the way we went with it. But it's a really interesting topic. I mean, that could be a whole show. Like, what should it be like to step into the world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think we should put that in the filing cabinet do a show on that at some point.
As a player who has a serious alt problem, I've found this kind of like zen point with tutorials and starting zones, because I've played every single one of them in every single game at least 10 times over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, good points, guys. Okay, so we'll finish up over on Facebook as we do. And there was a question from Daniel Blood, who has a super cool name, by the way. So he said he's thinking about pledging. He was looking at the advisor's pledge, which we actually mentioned earlier with Undertanker there. And the only thing that really looks appealing to him in the pledge package that comes with the advisor's pledge is the founder's conclave. So he just sort of wanted to know a little bit more about what VR has said about this. Like, what is it exactly? And that's my pledge level as well as the advisor pledge. So I did look into this as well when I made my pledge. And my understanding of the Founders Conclave is that it's basically, what we know is that it's likely going to be a crafting or a banking area. It doesn't offer any sort of bonuses or any kind of perks outside of perhaps being located in a more convenient place. So like by the city gates or something like that. This is based on a few forum discussions that have gone on. And most notably, there's a really good one on PantheonMMO.com in the forums by Stublin. So I won't go into the entire discussion here. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check it out, because there are a lot of good ideas brought up in it. And at the end of the day, though, VR has acknowledged that the Founders Conclave hasn't really been fully detailed yet, but they will do so down the road at some point when the game gets closer to launch. So I just think it's one of those little interesting pieces of information that we don't have yet, but could be really interesting depending on how they want to handle it. So hopefully, Daniel, you took the leap and you pledged. And if you're listening, that maybe answers your questions a little bit, or you can go and check out that link to get the answers that you're looking for. And that's it for this week's community discussions.
Just what are those creators up to out there?
All right, so let's talk about what's going on out there in the content creator world. We'll start with us as we always do. Now, last week, right when we started recording the show, we also put out another, I guess, call it episode or a adventure into the perception of Pantheon with Theric. And he started his class lore, part 1, which covered the monk, wizard, and enchanter. So some really cool ways to look at these characters from a lore perspective and understand their makeup and how some of their abilities may even work. So that was released last week. Didn't make it on the show, so I want to give a shout out. And make sure to check back because we'll probably be seeing more parts of that coming in the next few weeks or so. So definitely
I'll even give you a little exclusive sneak peek on the next one. The next one is going to feature the rogue, the warrior, and the cleric. So just keep your eyes open for that.
So that'll be the best one. So make sure you guys listen to that.
No, it doesn't have the ranger in it. How can it be the best one?
Exactly. Now, I was really, really excited as well that last week I got to sit with Dr. Greenspoon and really talk to him about the development of Valere, which is a game that obviously I've been talking about quite a bit. We did a couple different streams. Different people in the community have tried it. Omega, I sort of put him on the spot and asked him if he could give you access. I hope you messaged him because he did say he would. So hopefully you messaged him and got your account set up, because that's all you have to do. Go set an account up and tell him your account. We'll get you in there too to check it out. But the entirety of the interview was absolutely incredible, guys. He was very open about his direction, very open about his experiences and where that game's going to head. It made me feel even better about it. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, it's one that I'll ask you, please, as a supporter of us, go check it out. Make your own decisions, of course, but check it out. And if you like what you hear, you can check out more information on playvalor.com, but even more so, spread the word. This is a really small indie group making a game that has, in my opinion, really fun concepts, and I'd love to see it come to life sooner than later. So just check it out if you get a chance. And then we had, I'm gonna say this right here, probably the most fun Pantheon Plus you I've ever had. And I say, yeah, right. And I say that not because the Joppa interview was one of my favorites, and it will probably go down as one of my favorites ever because it's the first time I got to talk to a Pantheon dev, but I was nervous as all get out. Probably, hopefully it didn't come through on the show, but like, it just, I couldn't believe it was happening. And I think that I maybe missed some of the enjoyment because I was nervous and really trying to set it up. And this episode was just, it was everything. It was cheesy. It was crazy, and it went off without a hitch. So where do I begin? Let's start. Theric, Nathan, Militus were a huge part of the show. So thank you, Theric, for hosting. And I kind of just tossed that out to you.
It was so much fun. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
And then also, Nathan and Militus and the time they put in, and Militus's own scouting reports. I mean, it couldn't have gone better. And of course, Drac Attack making the cards, that was a huge hit. He's put a blog out there that you guys can actually check out all the cards that he made, and they're getting retweeted around by different content creators. People loved them. It was a lot of nonsense goofiness and bells and whistles that sort of all came together in a way that I really couldn't have been happier about. So to all the community members who came to hang out for the show and even came to talk on the air about their picks when they were picked, there's just so many people I could say thank you to. And I'm just going to encompass it by saying thank you to everyone for the sake of time. The community did an awesome job coming together to pick their team. I wish I could have been in that green room because I heard it was a hoot. Eric, you got to be in there a little bit.
It was a wild and wacky place.
Yeah. And without the community, we don't have a show. And I know that sounds cheesy, and I know that sounds like me pandering. It's not. It's Pantheon Plus U doesn't exist if people aren't in the green room, if people aren't in the chat, because the U part is the key to the show. So it's just awesome, and I loved it. I just want to give my favorite moment here. So Sacred getting traded around to different teams it's going to be my favorite moment. Me and him bust each other's balls more than I can tell you. The amount of time we'll stay up till 4 a.m. talking about stuff and busting on each other. But our relationship's really great. I'm very fortunate for our relationship. And it happened completely organically. The fact that he reacted the way he did and he played along, and I think somewhat also responded naturally, was just perfect. There was just so much to it. I mean, first I traded away my brother, Haya, my guy, one of my best friends in the world. And I did it because when I started this draft, I really wanted the rogues. And I picked Haya because I knew as the only monk, he'd have some value. So I'm not going to say I planned it, but I knew that if I had to trade, that this was a good trade asset. Meanwhile, it's like my best buddy. So it's a little roguelike there to do that.
Business first.
And then Sacred in Ronik's relationship, which I knew about behind the scenes, like the joking ball busting they do, I then flared that up on my own to get them talking. There was that discord between them, and that's when I jumped in and sort of used Sacred as a screen to get Kilson for Haya. So I'm not going to say that I wasn't a little manipulative here, which you have to do. You got to know your surroundings. You got to know your environment. So I used Sacred to get the rogue, and then I was fine with it. We had a really good group. We had a classic group. And then he started talking trash on rogues. And here's the thing. I knew that if I had sent Ben Dean to the community team, they would just keep him and be fine with it. But I knew that the joking relationship of how angry they were, which we were sort of hyping up on the whole show as they were drafting. I knew that putting Basgrim there was just, it wouldn't fit with the personality. So I knew if I wanted to go 2 tanks, I had to take Ben Dean, and then I had that trade piece in Sacred, which would fit great on their team. So there was a lot of backstage politicking from me, I'm not going to lie, to try to make it work. Never planned. Nobody ever had to accept anything, but I used some of my rogue wit to get our team to what I really like. It's an odd team, 2 DPS, 2 tanks, 2 healers, but I think it's a good team.
It ended up being a good team. And he almost was traded a 3rd time. The trade was turned down by team community. So it could have been even another trade on Sacred. But
if he would have made it to all 4 teams, that would have been the most legendary moment. It would have been hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite moment in that draft was so Militus always comes prepared, right? Whether it's an interview on another topic or whether, but this was no exception. He came in with these scouting reports that were so well written, and there were two instances where they were unbelievably prophetic because he actually called it out. Whoever was being drafted at that moment, he said, and this person should never be on the same team with this person. I think the first one was Lexer and Vandrad
Yeah.
because of the angry sort of, the strong angry dispositions of both. And it just happened to be that they did turn out on the same team. And then later in the draft, when we were talking when Basgrim was drafted, he mentioned Basgrim should never be on the same team with me because we will talk ad nauseum for 4 hours in a dungeon explaining every little detail.
And I think it was great because he said something like, if Basgrim's by himself, or maybe if Theric's by himself, it's going to put an extra 2 hours on your dungeon time. But if they're together, it's going to be like an extra 10 or something. And here you are together.
It was the most sort of coincidental moment. And those are the kind of things I love. But man, what a great time.
Omega, I know you only got to jump in late, but did anything stand out to you on the show?
Everything you guys have already said, like everyone really played their part and was really good-hearted about it, and that was great. But for me, my favorite bits of the whole thing was the extra layer of cheese in the production of the cards that Drac Attack did, but also that sound effect that you guys clicked on when you did the picks. Whatever that little jingle was, it was just perfect.
Well,
really that.
What a lot of people have said subsequent to the show is they're like, I've never watched an NFL draft.
No,
that was really cool. Now I want to watch an NFL draft. And Minus and I are both NFL fans, so that little jingle is part of the NFL draft show. So
that's really funny.
It's got that earworm quality that you recognize. So yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll add too, before we get off this topic here is when we were talking early, it was, well, are we on our own team? I go, no, we're not on our own team. And Militus goes, well, I can't pick myself. I go, well, then someone else is going to have to pick you. And Nathan's like, well, I'll never pick myself. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to be tough, guys. I don't know if I'd want to pick myself either. And then my first pick was me. So I was playing
a little smoke screen there, a little smoke screen. You picking yourself, that would be my runner-up for moment of the draft, because when I had to announce you picking yourself, was like, I could barely contain myself. I had to sort of be very calm about it.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it was made for humor, but also the whole rogue thing, but it worked so perfect. It was, that was a fun 100%. Moment. All right, guys. Well, I'll wrap up that part of it and just say, it was really good. And hopefully, you guys, if you watch the video, if you haven't seen it, or if you've already done it, just go and leave a comment on what your team would be if you got to pick your 6 people from the whole list. So I'd love to see that. And then real quick here, NathanNapalm put out a video on class balance, so you guys can check that out on his YouTube channel, which is linked below. And BattleAx on their Bat Live show talked about your ideal way to pay for your favorite online games, which is interesting because they talked about, free to play with a cash shop, free to buy to play, where you just buy it and then there's no sub, or do you buy it and have a sub, or is it free but then you have to buy a membership? So it's really interesting discussions around expansions and stuff like that and what you would like to do. So a lot of good stuff to digest there. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And don't forget that Bat Live is every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. They'll go anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. Kind of depends on how the topic's going. So if you're in there, give them some love, help them by throwing out some ideas and getting your ideas on the show. But that's it for the content creators.
The Plus in PantheonPlus. Here's your MMORPG news.
All right, so some genre news. The first thing we got in a little bit of industry news is from Zenimax Online Studios. They hired an industry veteran named Colin Campbell. I first got this piece on the Pantheon MMORPG Facebook group, so thanks to Chase for posting that there. Colin Campbell from Bioware fame is being brought on to Zenimax team as the lead level designer for their upcoming AAA MMO in a brand new IP that they haven't really detailed publicly yet. The company has had job postings for this game as far back as 2018, so we can assume production on the systems and such has kind of been happening for the last year. And it's not tied to Elder Scrolls or Fallout or anything like that in any way. Colin's resume has some pretty solid games on it, including Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, as well as Mass Effect Andromeda and Star Wars Battlefront 2. I haven't played through all of Fallen Order yet, but I have played Andromeda multiple times. And I mean, you can say what you will about the game as a whole, its level design was actually pretty fantastic. In Fallen Order 2, the levels I did get to play so far were very fun, beautifully designed. If these two titles are anything to go off of, I can imagine whatever MMO that they're working on is going to have some verticality in its level design and a massive feeling of scope and scale. Correction in our Discord on the story from last week for Camelot Unchained. So thanks to Herger for pointing this one out to me. I had stated that players were upset originally because the funds gathered from the crowdfunding for Camelot Unchained was used to create Ragnarok. But in fact, City State Studios had gained outside investment to make their PvE style game. So if this is true, people are just kind of being upset on the internet because they likely feel lied to. I found an article on this on Massively OP from back in February, and in the interview he states, without the push on Colossus Ragnarok, we wouldn't have gotten the additional investment in CSE for our from our investors, which was used in part to expand the team significantly. That in turn resulted in work that will speed up the remainder of CU's development, as well as add things that weren't planned for CU at launch. Regardless of outside investment, I think it's still a hard pill to swallow for fans. I mean, yes, they hired more people with additional money to make a new game that could potentially speed up the development of Camelot Unchained, but that speed up is yet to be proven. So the optics of the situation, in my opinion, are, that they started a new game that will actually release before Camelot Unchained. Again, I'm no dev. I don't know if this makes sense at all, but that's how it's going down. One possible saving grace for this whole situation is the backers of CU do get a copy of Ragnarok for free. So think of that what you will. Blue Protocol is having their beta test weekend over in Japan as of this moment on Friday, when I was compiling those notes, is off to a little bit of a rocky start. If you don't know what Blue Protocol is, it's an upcoming action-based AAA MMO from Bandai Namco. It's a total original IP with very anime-inspired art style. To me, it looks freaking beautiful, and the combat looks like a lot of fun too. It's it's a little more fast-paced action stuff. The beta wasn't region locked, but Bandai did turn down a whole lot of players outside of Japan who wanted to test the game. And even though they turned down all those people, the beta servers are still overloaded and people are having a tough time getting in. I do know of one YouTuber who is going to be playing and recording the beta test, so be sure to look up Cry. That's CRYY, Cry with 2 Ys. If you're interested in the beta, he's going to be playing all weekend and uploading footage next week as soon as he can with his thoughts. I just hope the people who did get in are having a little patience, because it's a beta and you can't get too pissed off at long queues and stuff like that. Saga of Leucemia is going into their final week of the weekend-long testing for Alpha Phase 3. In the weeks following, they'll be moving to 1 night a week testing, which takes place on Wednesday evenings. I'm not sure what time the servers go live, though. I have no doubt that a lot of great feedback was given to the devs, and I look forward to seeing more. Renfail has put together some stuff from the test, kind of a little sizzle reel video, and I found it on their Facebook page, so go check it out there. And as well, he posted a screenshot from the first raid-ish moment of the alpha test. It's a really great shot of this large group taking on a tough enemy, and to me it looks kind of like an open world boss, but the shot itself is tagged as Friday Night Raid Shot, so I'm not too sure how that's all going down. But in the screenshot, I counted 17 players, and they're all circled around this giant Cyclops, and it's nighttime, no less. So for those of you who follow Saga of Leucemia, you know that nighttime in that game is very dark, and you can't see anything without a torch. So there's this one player in the middle, kind of like under the legs of the Cyclops, just holding up this one torch so everybody around him can see what's happening. It's pretty funny. Links in the description for that Facebook group. Defend the Night. This is a big piece. They held an open roundtable with the community on Thursday to discuss the design philosophy of the Enchanter class. As some of you might remember, they held that vote a few weeks to see what the next class was going to be, heavily in development, and the Enchanter won the day. I went and I participated in the open discussion, and I gotta say, I am really excited for this game in general, but now even more so with the Enchanter class discussion. I've said this a few times around our gaming circle and in PantheonPlus, but I kind of missed out on that golden age of EverQuest and MMOs. I don't really have a lot of experience running through MMOs with large groups of people. I've never set up a camp or hunted rare spawns with friends or had like 20-hour gaming sessions just to go to bed for 4 hours and wake up and do it again. I've done that on my own, but never with a big group of people. So my experience is heavily based in SWTOR, which by the time I got to that was pretty soloable. And I've played Elder Scrolls Online on Xbox with some real friends and stuff. And I've ran a couple dungeons with the Saga of Leucemia guys back when Classic WoW launched. And the Rift stuff that we did, and then Minus's birthday, we did that EverQuest stuff. That's kind of the extent of my full dungeon group experiences with people who could coordinate. I've played almost any MMO out there now, but I don't have like that experience and that feeling. So in all my soloing adventures, random groups, I always knew that there was more to the genre and something that was certainly missing out of my experience. And I think I know now like what that linchpin thing was, and that's something these modern games have really taken away from, and it's the CC classes, that support style of gameplay. And not just the gameplay, but the games that require that style of gameplay. It's one thing for a game to have harder content at max level. I don't really like that. I think you should make your game fun and interesting from level 1. And I think Defend the Night is going to be one of those games that hits that nail and many others right on the head. So this Enchanter class talk, this is kind of what we talked about. And I want to be very clear, this is all early concept stuff. Nothing is set in stone yet, so anything is subject to change. But this is what they're doing. Lexer started out the conversation with this, and I quote him. Enchanters will fill the traditional support role, but in a new, highly active fashion. Rather than serving as a passive mana battery, enchanters will have a variety of tools that can help them generate, conserve, and reallocate resources amongst their group. Enchanters will specialize as mental or arcane-based spell slingers and will be unrivaled in their ability to leverage crowd control effects. They will have access to a summoned construct that can be used to possess their enemies with a sort of charm, a ranged tactical buff considerations, and an enchanting table that the group members can interact with. After that kind of preface, he went around the room and everyone got a chance to say what they think about the Enchanter class in other games, and not just the community members that were there, but the other devs too. And for these things, I couldn't catch a direct quote because I just can't type that fast. So I'm kind of paraphrasing here what Pi said. He's one of the developers. But he said he helped a bit with the design so far, and his inspiration for the class comes from EverQuest mainly. He loved how it played. It's very powerful and useful in a group, and in EverQuest, it was critical. So in Defend the Night, players are going to come across a lot of like, oh shit moments while adventuring, and the Enchanter is going to be vital to controlling the situation when that stuff happens. In general, he believes it's going to be a very fun support role and highly sought after for groups. Scribbles went next. Again, not a direct quote here I'm pulling, just from like bullet notes I was able to get. But he kind of said the EQ Enchanter was great for him. He did enjoy the Bard better. It was his first EQ character. And they shared some similar aspects like charm or mez. And then he kind of put out a question or a design idea for the community to mull over. And he asked, what do we think about having the Enchanter interact with augmenting objects? So an example would be something like a holding trap. Instead of just using his mind or spell, he could enchant a physical object to become a trap. And so the placement of that trap would be crucial on the field. And if you guys have ever heard Pi talk about his dungeon design, you know that tactical positioning and spatial awareness are going to be really huge things in Defend the Night. He also described that something that I think was a charm trap, if I remember correctly. Now, this one wasn't in my notes. I'm just going by memory. I kind of gave up on typing and just started listening. But a charm trap where the enchanter would enchant some sort of mask and then place that item in the world as a trap. So any mob that came near it, the mask would like fly up on their face and take over their mind. I'm just curious what you guys think about the enchanters. Like, I never got to play one in any of the games, so what do you guys think of the enchanter class? Minus?
I mean, I had a friend who played it nonstop in high school. And so I never played it a lot because he played it and I played more of a bard. But having him around was always awesome. You know, I played a wizard for a majority of the entry into EverQuest. I think my first like post 50 character was a wizard, like 51, 52. So having like the mana regen from an enchanter alone without everything else that they do was it was massive because I could put out so much more damage if he just got me more mana. So like he was sort of a mana battery for me. And then also just like being able, like you said, like mezzing groups and holding them, and then really having that strategic approach to combat. It was a lot different than not having him. If you didn't have him and you pulled 3 things, it was chaos. If you had him, you could pull 3 things on purpose, bring them all in, mez them, and tell everybody who they're supposed to fight. So it changed the gameplay a lot. It made things quicker. It made it so that you could take on more enemies. You had really nice buffs. So, and like there was nobody, whether you had an enchanter or not, before you were going on a long journey, everybody went into town and found what they called clarity, which became called crack, which was your regen for mana. So they were a staple to everything, whether they were in your group or not. You found one, and it was cool. I didn't enjoy the gameplay of one. I'm going to be open and honest with you. Soloing was about charming and killing stuff with your charmed enemies, and I really don't like that aspect of it. But what they brought was great, and it's been missed for a long time.
Yeah, so I'll seg from that because I think you're right. It's a very specific personality and play style that likes to play the Enchanter, and I don't think that personality has been given a class to play in a long time. So this is the type of person who wants to sit back, not be up in the fray, but not also causing damage and destruction, just sort of controlling the battlefield, being the puppet master from the back row. And that's what enchanters were in EverQuest. And you said minus, they called clarity crack. And that tells you all you need to know about how essential they were and what role they filled, and how you couldn't really do. I mean, you could, but without a really strong enchanter for some of the highest level stuff, you were really challenged unless you had a really high skilled bard or some other sort of control type class. So I'm excited to hear about, and I'm not surprised that Pi is sort of talking about viewing it from a different way, maybe looking at it from an environmental aspect of giving a class the ability to change environmental objects to sort of fulfill their function as controlling the battlefield. So I'm very excited to hear about their focusing on enchanters and how they're approaching that.
Cool. So after a little bit more discussion, they did a kind of another around the room and asked what players would love to see from the class. And something else I think is a little more important, what would dissuade them from wanting to play that class? And the response from the community members there was actually quite surprising to me. There were a few people who were concerned about the class's ability to play solo. And as soon as one person said that, in my head, I was just like, what? Yeah, like, you want to do what now? Like, you want to play an MMO by yourself? And to me personally, that's just kind of a bonkers thought pattern, but also understandable to a certain degree. Most modern MMO players have been bombarded with this solo mentality for years, and to an extent, I think, yes, every class has to be able to survive on its own, but survive using the player's brain, not just numbers that they have in the game. So if you're playing an Enchanter, and you don't have a group, then go do some easier stuff, or maybe don't take on a mob pack that's the same level or higher level than you. Go to a lower zone and grind it out for a bit. What they should do is solo enchanters should really go find a group to play with. Join a guild, hop in world chat, talk to people. So when it was my turn to chime in on that, I definitely made it known that MMOs should be social games, and a group should be needed for a large percentage of content in these MMOs that are being made, and defend the night for sure. A big problem with modern MMOs, in my opinion, is that you don't need a group with anyone until you get to the end game. Now, saying all that, I don't think the devs are remotely thinking that the Enchanter needs to be able to solo easily. They're pretty firm on their design ideas of class interdependence and bringing back the social aspects and challenge to the genre. Some other community members in the chat were of the mindset that it should have weaker DPS capabilities and really focus on group utility, and I totally agree with that type of stuff. So yeah, the Enchanter needs to be all about group support and utility. I just want to know your guys' thought about solo ability in the Enchanter class, and I guess solo ability in general. Theric, what do you think?
Well, Basgrim did a video about this quite a while ago called Forced to Group. I think that was the subtitle, but people are afraid of having that feeling of I can't do something alone, or I need to have a group to accomplish something that I want to accomplish. And that's, there wasn't that fear, hasn't always existed. It's not a natural sort of fear. It's something that's been ingrained because of the way MMOs have been designed in the last 10, 15 years, where everybody can, every class can viably solo to a certain extent. We know in Pantheon, the idea is that you're not forced to group. The content is not being designed for solo players, but there will be some classes that, with the right skills or the right approach, may be able to find some solo content, right? So that's sort of what I think the key takeaway from this is that it's not something to be afraid of, or it's not something to feel like, you should, the Pantheon won't be a great game because you're forced to group. That's the strength of the game. And the other point I'll make here too is that the reason that enchanters and sort of the control class in general and the group mindset have gone away is because the speed of the games have gone up so much, right? When the battles are fast and furious and everything dies in 10 seconds, there's no need for an enchanter. There's no need to control the battle to some extent, because it just doesn't. That's not the dynamic of the battle, and the action
Yeah.
is so fast paced, right? So I can see why people are having a hard time sort of maybe wrapping their minds around this if they haven't come from that background when things didn't go so fast and when grouping was the expectation or what you were looking for in the first place.
Yeah. Minus, what about you?
Yeah, for me, you brought up something about the fear of having to group. I actually disagree. I'm going to put on my inner militus hat. It's the people that are afraid of being told they're not allowed to be in a group. It's the fear
Fair.
of not finding a group. It's not a fear of being in a group. Everybody will be in a group if it's successful and they're welcomed in and it's a good environment. There's people that just fear rejection. And our society is built strictly on that. The social media society we have is totally built around people's fear of being not accepted. And everything in our PC culture is about not being accepted. And I think that's where the fear is that people are afraid they won't be able to find a group. So here's my thing with an enchanter. You're going to be able to find a group because you will have maybe one of the biggest advantages to a group, specifically if you have casters. So all your healers are going to love you. And if you have summoners or you have wizards, they're going to love you. So if you're able now to have an advantage on finding a group, which I do believe enchanters will have, then you should have a disadvantage when you're not. As a rogue, it might not be as easy for me to find a group. If I don't have a guild or the people are on that I play with, I may be a dime a dozen. I'm not going to bring as much to a group. Now, I may be able to DPS high, but then you're going to compare, every rogue who does the most DPS. As an enchanter, just being an enchanter is going to make it easier for you to get a group. So yes, it should be harder to solo if you are that much of an advantage to a group.
Well said.
Yeah, good points. These next two topics about the Enchanter from Defend the Night, where they were definitely some of the more interesting things that were talked about. The first being this concept of a construct. So the Enchanter will be able to summon an enchanted construct to act as a sort of weaker pet. This construct is going to be a crucial element to using some of the Enchanter's spells. And some of the abilities will even be locked out completely unless you have this construct summoned with you. I think one of the concepts is that it was going to be able to charm through your construct. Lots of cool ideas were kicked around by the devs and the community, and I think this thing is going to come out with some really cool utility to it. So it'll be a sort of tanky minor pet, and I imagine it kind of like a golem or something like that. But I'm not too sure. That's just my own speculation. And you'll be able to use its powers for all sorts of things. They aren't sure on a few things about it, like will it be a consumed spell or object? Like as an example, if you have it summoned, you get to access these cool spells, but once you cast that spell, it kind of crumbles away. Or you got to wait till you can summon another one to have access to those higher spells again. Another idea that was tossed out, that instead of it crumbling away, it just kind of goes into this power down state and just sits there until it either resets or you power it up again somehow, which I think would be awesome, because then you have to time it exactly when you want to use this power, and you got to be mindful that it's going to need to just sit there. Then what sort of penalties could happen if you end up having to abandon it for some reason? Will there be ways to power it up faster, or maybe negate a shutdown completely for a turn or something? An idea that I threw out in there was that your construct was sort of like a conduit to focus and amplify certain spells. Like if you did want to charm something, you could instead focus your spell through the construct, and it would modify that skill to be like an AE charm, but for half the duration or something like that. or a damage spell of some kind could be linked through the construct, and it gets amped up in some way, maybe does like double damage or whatever. Changes, or maybe it even straight up changes the construct itself, like you can buff it in some kind of weird way. But there's lots of cool things that could be done with an enchanted construct, and I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts that pop into your mind right off the bat about how an enchanter could use this little summoned pet in an interesting way. Minus, what do you think?
I'm going to be honest. I love the guys that defend the night. They know that I'm super into this game. I do not like this concept in the slightest. And let me go through why here. First, in MMORPGs, there shouldn't be pets in all the classes, and it should be super rare. If you're going to be a pet class, you should be a pet class because you need to develop that pet at a high level to function on the class. You can't have every class with a pet. And if I'm looking through their classes right now, they have one with the Shadow Knight. That they have one with a Necromancer. There is a possibility you'll see it with Druid and Ranger. There's a possibility that their Mage could have it. So, I mean, more than half your classes are going to have a pet. And again, some of that stuff I said, Druid, Ranger, Battle Mage, we don't know that, but those are traditional sort of pet things, especially a Ranger. I don't like it. It doesn't need it. Why is there a pet? You have a pet that can charm. Just make the Enchanter charm. And I get that these are new, innovative ideas, but sometimes this is what I've talked about on many occasions. Like when you try to innovate by putting concepts of other things into your concept, you're not innovated. You're just adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. That's not innovation. Right. And again, I'm not trying to be hard on Defend the Night. I love these guys. I love Pi. All those guys know how I feel about them. So I'm not hitting on them hard for this, like out of spite. But why does an Enchanter need a pet? The Enchanter pet in EQ was worthless and it was unneeded. So it wasn't an aspect that you're trying to design around being like, well, we have to do something because EQ had a pet. It was awful. So I think to get rid of it, I don't think it needs a pet. Enchanter is a control class, not a pet class. Let's not try to merge those two things. I'm overall not a fan of pet classes in general, unless it's done magnificently well. And I can only name one or two games that have done that magnificently well. So just not a fan.
Fair enough. Derek, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to defer mostly, but I'm just going to make a point that look at, with Pantheon's development. And the reason we haven't seen the summoner a lot of times VR has said is because designing a really strong pet class is very difficult. And they've had issues, right, with how pets act, behave, respond to commands, and just basically how they function in the game. So, I would just put that out there and say that be cautious. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know either.
All right, so this last thing I want to talk about the Enchanter from that discussion was the Enchanter table. And this thing sounds really, really cool to me. Another developer named Brig hopped into the chat and he kind of dove into this feature. And once he got into it, I think it's one of the most clever designs idea that I've heard. So it's this table that the Enchanter can conjure into the world, and anyone from the party can interact with it. From my understanding, it can be summoned anywhere at any time, but it's probably got a cooldown. Once it's in the world, any member of the party can interact with it, and this table has a variety of items. And these items would be things like illusions or something that the player could buff to themselves, or maybe to their gear. But he also mentioned racial bane procs as a thing. So example, you're going into an area that's full of undead, and the Enchanter of the group can kind of summon this table, and the players can go through all the stuff that's on it and sort through the bonuses that they want to give themselves. And some of those bonuses are actually going to interact with each other in really interesting ways. So there's this layer of coordination that's going to be added to it. Each player can pick one thing, and it's on a timer for X amount of time before it runs out. I think Briggs mentioned something like 10 minutes is just what they're working with right now. Over time, the Enchanter will find new things for this table to have, and it will be this ever-growing list of really cool situational items that the players in the group can choose from. At the moment, the idea behind these items is that they're going to be things out in the world that the Enchanter is going to have to track down. So they could be related to quests, they could be rare drops, or just like out in the world randomly. But they're not tied to your character level. So you won't just be granted these things by leveling up. You got to go out and adventure and find them. The clever bit to me about this Enchanter table is the design idea behind it is a big way to cut down on ability bloat. So instead of having like all these hotbars with all these cool Enchanter buffs and utility things clogging up your screen, and maybe even ultimately being forgotten about, There's just this one skill that you summon a table, and your group can kind of go through it and pick the things themselves. Just kind of, what do you guys think about that? Like the Enchanter table, and groups having their own kind of choices and stuff. What do you guys think about that, Theric?
It's interesting. It's interesting. I feel like I need to see it to really understand how this is going to work. You did a good job of explaining it, but it's in my mind. I'm not seeing it clearly enough to really comment on it. So I'll throw it over to you, Minus.
I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I imagined you right click on the table and this new interface menu comes up and it's got all these buffs you sort through like a crafting menu and you put them on yourself. I don't hate it. It's new. It's interesting. That table would be something that the Enchanter is leveling and inquiring skills for, which would be kind of neat if that's the way they went about it. I think I'm like you, though. I'd have to see it in play to really see how it worked. That's tough because you'd have to design this huge thing to even just see. But I don't know. That one's not so bad.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I couldn't stick around for the whole conversation that they had, like all this kind of information I've gathered, and I've left a few things out. But that was about 70-ish minutes that I got to hang out with. I think they did another half an hour or so after that. The devs were really open with their ideas and their inspirations, which is what I really liked about it. Like, and all the ideas from the community were welcome and discussed. I mean, some ideas snowballed into other ideas, and it was just really awesome to be in at that like ground level of class design discussion, especially for a class that I've never played before, like ever in a game. I mean, these points about the table and the construct, like you guys, from having experience of playing enchanters and seeing enchanters, you might not be too stoked on it. And for me, who's never even seen an enchanter in a game, it's just like, wow, this is really neat to me. So Ninja Loot Games, like, they're striving to create a game that's more social and group focused, and I think they're gonna keep true to that for sure. They all take it quite seriously, the community feedback. So if anyone is listening and wants to get in on that, make sure you join their Discord and the forums as well, because they do a lot of stuff there. To close this out, I'll stress again, like, the game is in very early days. Nothing is set in stone. Everything's subject to change, but the team is very dedicated, and they're taking their time to make their vision come to life. And I have no doubt that this class will shape up exactly how they want it. And that's all I got for the genre news.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys once again. And thanks to everyone for checking out the PantheonPlus Rewind. As always, we'd love any feedback on how to keep you interested in listening and what you would change or keep the same. So, of course, Theric, Omega, thank you guys for making this process so seamless. That's it for us today.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the PantheonPlus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all PantheonPlus related content at PantheonPlus on Twitter and PantheonPlus on both Twitch and YouTube. Follow Theric at PantheonTheric on Twitter, and be sure to follow Omega Contagion at Discord via the name Omega Contagion 6023, and of course in the Facebook group PantheonMMO RPG. Until next time.